So one day on YouTube, I stumbled upon this video talking about,
Abbasid Dark Age Ram Rush.
yeah, it seems he didn't have much success in 1v1 for the moment. But it got me thinking about the Abbasid Dark Age potential, especially the synergy of ram with other types of aggression. Maybe you could ram the opponent's tower when they counter tower your tower rush. Or maybe you could take down docks in hybrid maps. In this video, I would like to showcase two games that I recently played on 1v1 ladder at around 1300 elo, which involves me playing Abbasid and Ram in Dark Age. I won't say it's a Ram rush, but it involves Ram, severely. And yes, I won both games. Before we begin, props to Vidromar, who made that awesome Ram rush video. If you haven't checked out his channel, the link is in the description. In this game, the opponent is playing the HRE, and the map is Ancient Spire. My thought process was that I want to delay his castle age as much as possible, since an HRE player with 3 relics is quite hard to stop. So, I want to deal some early damage, and fall back to an eco expansion. This is kind of the theme of these games, and the mindset of the Abbasid Dark Age rush. The early rushes are not meant to kill, rather to slow down the opponent of getting into their ideal composition, while you have an easier time developing eco in the back of the aggression. Comparing to land maps, I think hybrid maps are easier to execute the rush, since you are naturally heavy on wood with your eco for your fishing ship. You will be easier to afford the barrack and later the rams when you stop fishing ship production. I've also made a second scout for taking more ships and to have additional line of sight on the map. Playing in this style really needs you to know what your opponent's reaction, and so an additional scout helps a lot. Apart from that, the early game is quite standard for a hybrid map. Having 1 on food in the beginning and the rest on wood, gradually adding villagers on food until you have 4, and then all the remaining villagers to wood, because you will need a lot of wood in the early game. Keep a lot of your attention to scout. You would want to scout what he is doing on time, whether he's doing a dock expansion or a full land economy. This would allow you to identify possible targets for your rushes, or even decide whether to do the rush or not. The most exposed target on this map is a dock, if there is one. The dock is often built far beyond the main base, which makes it easier to destroy. If I have found his dock, then destroying it would become my priority. If not, then I might need to target his gold, which is less ideal. I might then decide not to rush at all, since I have a fishing eco, but not my opponent. Once I have scouted his dock, I cancel my mining camp and turn it into a barrack, so I can make spear and eventually a ram, in order to destroy his dock. You will need to keep around 9 fishing ships and villages combined on food for constant spear and villager production. So keep an eye on that. Extra villagers should all go to wood now, because you will need spears, rams, eventually a house of wisdom, and a mining camp. So you will need a lot of wood for the moment. I've also brought in a lot of sheep in this game, because of the second scout I made in the early game. It might not be that consistent of having that much sheep for every of your game, but you might have the chance to get that much sheep if you have invested in the second scout. When you have the spear built, go straight to your target. In this case, would be the dock. You either want to start your ram production near the target, or you want to shut down any resistance in that area. In this case, I saw that there is no tower being built, so I could start harassing even with one spear. I also rallied the spear forward near my target. Keep an eye on the opponent's base to see if he responds with any army or not. Which, in this case, I should have moved the scout into here. This will help you to estimate how much time you have for dealing damage. As my spear comes near, I poke his villagers to stop him from building the tower. As his villager ran away, finish off the villagers with my scout, as my spear is running a bit slower. With that in mind, I have completely controlled the area, so the next objective is to destroy the dock. And sadly, I lost a scout there. After killing the villager, I feel like building a ram could speed up the time for killing the dock and the tower. And I have just reached 300 wood, so I decided to build one. Well, once I have the ram down, I started mining gold for age up. I have also started the House of Wisdom. In both games, I age up at around minute 8 or 9, so you don't need to rush it. But with practice, you should be able to reach an earlier timing. You should have already gained a lead by the early aggression, so just fall back a bit. Don't need to rush it. I do think the ram, in this case, is a good decision, since not only I would destroy his dock, which would have half the ram's price, I would also be denying his fishing ships for a few minutes, which cut into his food income, delaying his castle age timing, and that is what I wanted after all, to delay my opponent's timing. It would be ideal for you to deal as much damage as possible, but most likely your opponent will reach feudal within half a minute. So deal the damage you could do to him, but no need to be greedy. In this case, I will be taking down the dock and as much fishing ships as possible, but nothing really more. After my opponent reached feudal, I can't really push into his base, as he had multiple ways to deal with his aggression. With all that in mind, I could easily go for an eco approach in feudal, knowing that I will have more time before his power spikes are coming. I eventually reached feudal age in around 9 minutes, turning this into a 2 TC boom, into castle age push, and end the game there. So, let's look at another game. In this game, the opponent is playing the French, and the map is Mountain Pass. In this game though, I didn't really know how I would want to approach in the first glance, so I stumbled upon the first few villages assignment. Eventually, I came up with the idea that I want to deny him from gold, so that he's restricted from making lots of feudal knights, which are harder to deal with. I could then wall the middle when he's distracted from my attack and fall back into 2 TCs. Again, another game of making an early aggression so that I could play eco in the feudal age. So, I tried to switch my villages around, bringing in heavy wood income for the moment. Although I would also want to keep a few villages on food for the moment, since I don't have fishing ships for constantly producing villages at this game. But hey, adapting is one of the keys in playing Age of Empires, right? By doing so, I managed to have my barracks down at around 1 minute 10. This game, I chose to open 1 scout rather than 2, which in hindsight was a mistake. I couldn't keep up with collecting sheep and scouting my opponent's base at the same time. I didn't have any information about my opponent, didn't know where to pressure, and didn't know my opponent's game plan. 2 scouts would have been better. But now the damage is done, and I now have to cope with it. I now run my scout straight into enemy base, grabbing any information I could get. I was so lucky that I spot his front goat even after I have dropped my own barrack, which means it is easy to target his goat for my aggression. At home, I was trying to keep building villages and sneaking some spear at the same time. When I had my spearman popping out, I sent him straight into enemy base, besides the main target that I'm going to attack, which is the gold mine. Going back to my game plan, I'm going to deny him from gold. So starting off my attack onto a gold mine seems very logical. At home, I was constantly macroing into wood, while keeping a few on food for constant villager production. I won't need constant spearman production until my opponent responds with an army of spearmen himself, since my primary damaging tool is actually not spearmen, which is something else. In this situation, as I was thinking about denying gold from my opponent, my main aggression would be from towers, as they are very good at denying opponents resources in the early game. Now normally your opponents would respond by counter-towering. Just build a tower before you build your first tower, which is the standard way to deal with a tower rush. But in this case, we have the Dark Age Ram in our favor, which could be used to deal with your opponent's counter-tower. So, if your opponent tries to counter-tower you, then you could just make a ram in the covering of your tower and ram into his counter-tower, while still denying him resources. In this case though, I wasn't having any initial resistance from my opponent. So now I'm trying to poke his villagers, trying to get him out of gold. I've also bagged up the required resources for a ram if needed. I also tried to poke his villagers from building the landmark, but to no avail. At this point, you could consider after the ram to transition into feudal age. Start mining gold and pop down the House of Wisdom when you have the wood. It will speed up your feudal timing, which won't be as late as I was in this game. You could also, being a special case about this map, start walling the middle. You will see that I have done that way too late in the game. That nearly cost me the game. I think you could start walling right away as the opponent is so focused on your forward position and doesn't know about what you're up to. Now my opponent has reached feudal age, which I wasn't able to stop him from doing so. The ram I made here wasn't really paying off much though, as my opponent has reached feudal age right at the same time. So maybe I should have stopped the ram production at this moment. Fortunately for me, he made his archery range in front of his base, which enables me to target it with the protection of my tower. If I made my tower a bit in the front though, then it would have been perfect. Now my ram is finished, I send it straight into my enemy's archery range, trying to take it down. My new tower also covers some of my opponent's tree line, so I was actually denying 2 of his resources, albeit not denying his wood fully. Even though it wasn't perfect, I could still use my tower to provide covering fire for my ram, so I actually don't need to bring in the spear to the front. The garrison mechanic of ram in the game right now is kinda unintuitive, so hopping in and out of the ram is quite cumbersome now. This also contributes to the low usage of the strategy, since it is quite hard to use it effectively. I paid my price here, losing all my spears to my opponent while only taking an archery range from him. After losing my whole army, I made a few more spears in case of facing an attack, hoping that he won't send his army into my base at this moment. I was also trying to tech up as soon as possible, since any Dark Age aggression would not be as successful. We have denied some resources from our opponent and delayed him from making a scary army. So we should now fall back and hope we could expand our lead. At this point in the game, I am nearly having the resources to click up into feudal. However, I have forgotten my House of Wisdom, so it wasn't even started until the 7-minute mark. So naturally, you could reach the feudal age a bit faster with this build. I still haven't walled the middle, which I'm doing it now. If you have followed my previous advice, you would have walled the center already. Then you will be somewhat safe at the moment. And so, this is the game. Like the previous one, I managed to turn it into a boom of 2 TC, shut down his attack with Spearmen and Horsemen, and win the game with a Castle Age push. This is the end of this video. Thank you for watching.